Welcome back to Books and Bytes. Today we're going deep into this book, Crime and Punishment. It's by Fyodor Dostoevsky.
Yeah, Crime and Punishment. It's a classic for a reason.
I mean, everyone always says that, but this time it's true.
Right.
This book, it's not just some murder mystery, It really gets into your head. You go on this journey with this guy, Rodion Raskolnikov. He does something truly awful. I mean, we're talking about murder here.
And he thinks he can get away with it.
Well, yeah, and not even just that. He thinks he's right to do it.
Right.
Like he's above, regular morality. Like he can decide who lives and dies.
Dostoevsky really nails it with the setting. 19th century St. Petersburg. It's a city full of poverty and this, crushing despair.
That's where we find Raskolnikov, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's a former student.
Exactly. And he's trapped in this cycle of poverty, just barely getting by.
But it's not just about being poor, right? It's his ideas, his intellect, that lead him down this really dark path.
It's like he's too smart for his own good, He gets this idea, he calls it the Napoleon complex.
So he's comparing himself to Napoleon.
In a way, yeah. He believes there are certain people, these extraordinary people like Napoleon, who are above the law. Like they're destined for greatness and the rules don't apply.
Okay, so that's where this whole justification comes from.
Right. He twists things around in his mind until he believes he can do whatever he wants. And that's how Alyosha Ivanovna, this pawnbroker, becomes his target.
So she's what, like a symbol of everything he hates?
She's greedy. She takes advantage of people. In Raskolnikov's mind, she's like a parasite, feeding off the misery of others. He fixates on her.
He convinces himself that her death would be a good thing. Like he's doing society a favor.
And Dostoevsky does this amazing job of showing how all these things come together in Raskolnikov's head. The poverty, the isolation, and this warped ideology. It all mixes together and, well, it leads to murder.
It's not just about Alyosha, though.
No, you're right. It's about him proving his theory. Testing whether he's one of these quote-unquote extraordinary men.
And then there's the letter from his mother.
That letter throws him for a loop.
It's like another nail in the coffin.
It really pushes him over the edge.
His mother writes about Dunya, his sister, who's about to marry this guy, Luzhin. And Luzhin, he's not a good guy.
He's got money, but, well, he's just bad news.
Raskolnikov sees this marriage as a sacrifice. Like, Dunya is selling herself for security.
It confirms everything he hates about society, how the rich exploit the poor.
It's so messed up. But Dostoevsky uses this letter brilliantly. It just adds to Raskolnikov's despair. It's like the world is pushing him towards this terrible act.
And then in a tavern, it gets even worse.
What happens?
Raskolnikov overhears this conversation. Two men are just casually talking about whether killing Alyosha would be justified. Can you imagine?
It's chilling.
It's like his own twisted thoughts are being echoed back to him.
So it's like fate is like sealing his decision.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff. And from that moment on, there's no going back. Raskolnikov, he plans the murder meticulously. He even does a test run, just to make sure he can go through with it.
This is cold-blooded. This is calculated.
It's all driven by his ideology, his belief that he's above the law.
And then the murders themselves.
They're brutal. He goes to Alyosha's apartment, kills her with an axe. And then Alyosha's sister Lizaveta walks in. He has to silence her, too.
So he kills two people.
Two people, and that's where the real story begins, really. The act itself is done, but for Raskolnikov, the punishment, that's just starting. He barely takes anything of value, which just shows his motive wasn't robbery.
He was proving a point.
A horrible, twisted point, and it backfires immediately. He's plunged into this world of paranoia and guilt. He's tormented.
Dostoevsky really takes us there, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Into the darkness of Raskolnikov's mind. It's not easy to read, but it's so powerful.
It's like we're right there with him, experiencing his descent into madness. But even in all that darkness, there's this glimmer of hope, this possibility of redemption. And that's what makes Crime and Punishment so compelling. It's like watching this train wreck in slow motion, Raskolnikov, he's fallen apart.
Yeah, you can just feel the walls closing in.
It's not just in his head either. It's like the guilt is making him sick. He's feverish, can't sleep, jumps at every little sound.
Always looking over his shoulder, right?
Exactly. Convinced that everybody knows. And those stolen goods he hid, they're like this physical reminder of what he did. He can't escape it.
So he's trapped, even though he's free. But wait, there's Razumikhin.
Oh, yeah, Razumikhin's such a good guy. He's Raskolnikov's friend, truly cares about him, you know?
He tries to help.
He does. He really does. But Raskolnikov, he pushes him away. He just can't handle any kind of human connection, you know? The guilt is eating him alive.
Like he wants to suffer alone.
Yeah, it's pretty tragic. And then this summons from the police, it's not even about the murders, but it almost breaks him.
It's like he's on the verge of a total meltdown.
Right, and that's when we meet Porfiry Petrovich. He's the one investigating the murders.
Oh, Porfiry, he's something else.
He's not your typical detective.
Yeah, more like a mind reader, you know, a psychologist.
He sees right through Raskolnikov. He knows something's off. But instead of just accusing him, he plays this game with him.
It's psychological torture.
It is. Porfiry drops these little hints, watches Raskolnikov squirm. He's waiting for him to crack under pressure.
Dostoevsky's such a master at building suspense.
Oh, totally. And while all this is going on, we have another character coming into the picture, Luzhin.
Dunya's fiancé, right.
One and only. And he is everything Raskolnikov hates about the world.
So basically he's the worst.
Pretty much. He's all about money and status, wants to control Dunya, use her to climb the social ladder.
It's like oil and water when those two are in the same room.
You can just feel the tension. Their values are completely opposite. And then, we have Marmeladov. Well, he's a sad case. A drunk, but also just a victim of circumstance. He represents the poverty, the despair that's everywhere in St. Petersburg.
He's kind of a lost soul.
Exactly. And then something awful happens. He gets run over by a carriage. Dies right there in the street.
Oh, man, that's rough.
It is. But his death introduces us to his daughter, Sonia.
The Sonia, right.
And her story's heartbreaking. She's forced into prostitution to support her family.
It's just awful.
It shows how desperate things are for some people. But here's the thing about Sonia. She still has faith. She's pure, despite everything she's been through.
So she's like the symbol of hope.
In a way, yeah.
Oh.
And she becomes so important to Raskolnikov. They're both suffering, both isolated, even though their lives are so different. Their connection, it's really powerful.
So we've got this psychological torture from Porfiry. We've got Luzhin being a jerk. We've got Sonia trying to be the light in the darkness. What happens next?
Well, Porfiry keeps playing his mind games. He even mentions this article that Raskolnikov wrote, the one about extraordinary men.
He's not letting up, is he?
Not at all. And Luzhin, he just keeps getting worse. He tries to frame Sonia for stealing. Can you believe it?
He's trying to destroy her.
He wants to discredit Raskolnikov, control Dunya. But luckily, there's this guy, Lebezyatnikov. He sees what Luzhin is doing and exposes him.
So Sonia is saved.
She is. It's a small victory, but it matters. But then things get really crazy. There's this painter, Nikolai, kind of a messed up guy, and he confesses to the murders.
Wait, what?
Yeah, out of the blue, he confesses. And now Raskolnikov has to make a choice.
Wow, that's a huge decision.
He can let this innocent man take the fall for him, or he can confess and face the consequences. What would you do?
I don't know. That's a tough one.
It is. And Raskolnikov is torn apart. He doesn't know what to do. So he goes to Sonia. She's the only one he can talk to. And he confesses everything to her.
So he finally tells someone the truth.
He breaks down. He's so full of guilt, so desperate for forgiveness. And Sonia, she listens. She doesn't judge him. She urges him to confess, to accept his punishment.
She thinks that's the only way he can find peace.
Exactly. And this confession, it changes everything. It's a turning point. Raskolnikov is finally facing what he's done. But then, just when you think things can't get any more complicated, we meet this new character, Svidrigailov.
Svidrigailov, who is he?
Well, he's connected to Dunya somehow. And he's a bad guy, like seriously messed up.
Yeah, great. Another one.
And he knows Raskolnikov's secret. It's really creepy, the way he just appears like a ghost from the past.
So what does he want?
That's the question, isn't it? It's all coming to a head, Raskolnikov, he's got Svidrigailov hanging over him, Sonia pushing him to confess, Porfiry closing in.
You can't escape it anymore.
No, he can't. And then there's Svidrigailov. He ends up killing himself. It's like this dark mirror, showing Raskolnikov what could happen to him if he doesn't change.
Like a warning sign.
Yeah, exactly. And then Porfiry, he confronts Raskolnikov, lays it all out, tells him he knows he's the murderer.
So the game is over.
It is. But Porfiry, he does something unexpected. He gives Raskolnikov a choice. He can confess and maybe get a lighter sentence.
So there's still a chance for him to do the right thing.
There is. And it's a huge decision for Raskolnikov. He's been running from the truth for so long. But everything has been leading up to this moment.
So what does he do?
He confesses. He turns himself in. gives up his freedom.
Wow. So he chooses punishment over freedom.
He chooses truth. He chooses to face what he's done. He gets sentenced to 8 years of hard labor in Siberia.
8 years, that's a long time.
It is, but it's also a chance for him to redeem himself. And here's the thing, Sonia goes with him. She follows him to Siberia.
She's incredible.
She's amazing. She gives up everything to be with him, to support him. She believes in him, even when he doesn't believe in himself.
That's true love right there.
It is. It's a beautiful, powerful thing. But even with Sonia by his side, it's not easy for Raskolnikov. At first, he's still so lost, so detached.
He's still got a long way to go.
Oh, yeah, he does. But Siberia, it changes him. The harsh conditions, the isolation, the constant reminder of what he did, it forces him to face himself.
He can't hide from his guilt anymore.
No, not anymore. And slowly, through his suffering, through Sonia's love, he starts to understand. He sees the depth of his crime. He lets go of that extraordinary man theory.
He finally realizes he was wrong.
He was. It's a long, painful process, but it's also a kind of rebirth, you know? He accepts his guilt, not just legally, but morally. He repents, and that's where redemption begins.
So there's hope for him.
There is. Dostoevsky leaves the ending a little open, but we see that Raskolnikov is changing. He's on the path to becoming a better man.
It's a powerful message, right? That even after such darkness, there's a chance for redemption.
It's a story that really stays with you.
It does. Crime and Punishment, it's about guilt, about punishment, about love, about faith. It's about what makes us human, you know, the good and the bad. And it's a book that everyone should read. So if you haven't read it yet, do yourself a favor and pick up a copy. We've got a link in the description. And be sure to subscribe to Books and Bites for more deep dives into amazing books like this one. Thanks for listening. Welcome to another deep dive with Books and Bites. Today we're really getting into it with Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. You know this book. I mean, it's a masterpiece. It just gets called that constantly for a reason. Regarding faith, doubt, morality, all the big stuff. What makes us human, you know? It can be pretty complex, but I'm telling you, it's so worth it.
Oh, you're so right. The Brothers Karamazov is more than just a story. It's like Dostoevsky is really trying to get us to look at the human condition. He gives us these huge characters, the Karamazov brothers, and through them, he just digs into all these philosophical and psychological questions.
Yeah, let's get this family introduced. So right at the center of it all, we've got Fyodor Pavlovich Karamazov, the dad. And he is a mess, let me tell you. Like, zero paternal instincts, totally driven by these base desires. I mean, his actions, or I guess you could say inactions, really set the stage for everything that goes wrong with his sons.
Fyodor Pavlovich, he's like this symbol of spiritual and moral emptiness. He's Dostoevsky's way of showing us the dark side of humanity, like all that selfishness, greed, lust, you know? And it really messes up his sons, each in a different way.
So we've got Dmitri, the oldest,
Right.
passionate guy, impulsive, basically ruled by his desires. Then there's Ivan, the middle son. He's brilliant, but it's also really tormented by his own intelligence, you know?
Yeah.
Try to figure out what it all means if there's no God. And then we have Alyosha, the youngest. He's devout, compassionate, finds comfort in his faith. And of course, he has this spiritual mentor, Father Zosima.
Can't forget Smerdikov, the illegitimate son, always kind of lurking in the background. He embodies this nihilistic despair, this feeling that life is meaningless. And he becomes this really fascinating, kind of unsettling contrast to the other brothers. He shows us what their struggles might lead to, you know, if they're not careful.
Yeah. The book opens with all the brothers getting back together at the monastery.
Yeah.
And you think, oh, they're going to talk about Dmitri's inheritance. How nice. But surprise, it all blows up, right? All these resentments and these deep psychological wounds just come pouring out.
Dostoevsky's really clever with this first part. He's setting the stage for the tragedy, introducing us to all the players, showing us their motivations. He's basically giving us all the pieces of this complex puzzle and saying, okay, try and put it together.
And one thing that really stands out in this first part is the way he explores faith and doubt. You've got Alyosha looking to Father Zosima for guidance. He represents this like unwavering belief.
Yeah.
And then there's Ivan with all his skepticism, challenging everything. Like, is there even a God? Is there even such a thing as morality?
Ivan's struggle, that's really something. He's got this idea that if there's no God, then everything is allowed, which is, you know, a scary thought, and it's a thought that really impacts how all the characters act throughout the book.
And then there's this whole other conflict brewing. Dmitri and his father both fall for Grushenka, and she is captivating, but she can be manipulative too. It's a love triangle that just pushes all the tensions over the edge. Dmitri gets even more impulsive, and things just keep escalating between him and his father.
Oh, Dostoevsky just gets human psychology. Like, he really gets into these complicated desires, the jealousy, how destructive it can be when love isn't returned. And he puts it all against the backdrop of Russia at the time, all this social and political upheaval.
Yeah, by the end of part 1, you just feel this sense of dread, like something terrible is about to happen. We just don't know what it is yet.
Exactly. And that's what makes Dostoevsky so great. He keeps you on the edge of your seat, pulls you into the drama. He makes you think about your own beliefs, what's good and what's evil. He doesn't give you easy answers. He just gives you this profound look into what it means to be human.
So we're moving into part 2 of the Brothers Karamazov, and things get really intense. Dostoevsky takes us right into the conflict, shows us what happens when these characters make the choices they do.
Part 2 is where all these ideas Dostoevsky's been setting up about God, morality, all that, they really start to come together. We see how Ivan's ideas about a world without God, how they start to affect the people around him, especially Smerdyakov.
Yeah, it's like Ivan saying all these nihilistic things basically gives Smerdyakov permission to just act on all his dark impulses. Like, he already hates Fyodor Pavlovich, thinks the world's meaningless anyway, so hearing Ivan talk just makes it more dangerous.
And then we get to the Grand Inquisitor. This is like a huge chapter. Ivan tells this story to Alyosha, and it's kind of a turning point in the whole book, a story within a story. And it just brings up all these deep questions about faith, free will, good and evil.
Oh, the Grand Inquisitor. I'm telling you, that's one of the most thought-provoking parts of the whole book. So haunting. Ivan's story about Christ coming back to earth during the Inquisition, getting thrown in prison by the church. It's just so powerful. It makes you question everything, Authority, faith, what people really want.
Right. The Grand Inquisitor, his whole argument is that Christ was wrong to give people freedom. He says what people really want is security, comfort, not the burden of making choices. He actually says people are willing to give up truth and freedom just to be happy and have things in order.
Scary, isn't it? And what makes it even more unsettling is that Christ doesn't say anything. The whole time the Inquisitor is talking, Christ is silent. I feel like Dostoevsky is saying, okay, you figure it out. What do you think about all this?
It's so interesting how this big philosophical debate is happening while Dmitri is just falling apart. He's obsessed with Grushenka. He's broke. He's furious at his father. It's all just pushing him to the edge.
Yeah, Dmitri's just totally consumed by all this passion. He threatens his father, does all kinds of reckless stuff. He's just spinning out of control. And you can see it's going to lead to something bad.
And on top of that, you've got Alyosha dealing with his own crisis of faith. His mentor, Father Zosima, dies, and it just shakes him. And then there's this scandal, people saying Zosima's body is decomposing too fast. And Alyosha starts to doubt. Could everything he believed in, everything that gave him comfort, could it all be a lie?
It's a really rough time for Alyosha. He has to face the possibility that his faith isn't what he thought it was. And that doubt, that uncertainty, it sends him on his own journey.
Dostoevsky is brilliant at weaving all these storylines together, the philosophical stuff, the emotional journeys, it's all connected. He's showing us how ideas really do have consequences, how those big concepts of good and evil actually play out in the real world where things are messy and unpredictable.
And then it happens. Fyodor Pavlovich is murdered, and the book just takes this dark turn. It goes from this philosophical exploration to a murder mystery.
That murder, it changes everything. It forces the characters to face their own guilt, Think about the things they've done and what the consequences really are.
And, yeah, everyone thinks Dmitri did it right away. But then the question of who really killed Fyodor Pavlovich and why, it becomes so much more complicated.
You can tell Dostoevsky isn't just trying to solve a murder. He's using it to look at bigger issues like morality, justice, even what truth actually is.
Okay, so we're in the final part of the Brothers Karamazov, and the focus really shifts. Now it's all about what happens after Fyodor Pavlovich's murder. We've got the trial, Dmitri on the stand, but it goes deeper than that. It's like we're really seeing the impact of this crime, especially for Ivan.
You're right. Ivan's descent into madness is just captivating. The guilt just eats him up, and he can't escape this idea that his words about God, about morality, maybe they pushed Smerdyakov to do it.
It just destroys him, doesn't it? He goes to Smerdyakov looking for answers, some way to understand it all. And that's when Smerdyakov actually confesses. He says he was inspired by Ivan, those pronouncements that everything is permitted if God's not there.
It completely breaks Ivan. He starts seeing things, having conversations with the devil. It's like his mind's falling apart. All this self-doubt, this madness, it just takes over.
The scenes with the devil, oh man, they're so vivid, so disturbing. It's like we're right there with Ivan, feeling that torment, watching him unravel.
And then Smerdyakov kills himself, so the truth, whatever it is, it dies with him. Ivan's stuck. He tries to confess, wants to clear Dmitri during the trial, but everyone thinks he's lost it, just rambling like a madman.
And that trial, it's like it shows us everything the book's been talking about.
Yeah.
The limits of justice, how powerful perception and prejudice can be,
Yeah.
how hard it is to find the truth.
Yeah, and Dmitri, for all his flaws, he almost becomes a sympathetic character, all this evidence against him, but it's mostly circumstantial, right? Because of his temper, his relationship with his father.
He's not just a monster, though, is he? You can see he feels remorse. He wants redemption. He's complicated, like all of us, trying to fight his own demons.
And even though Ivan tries to tell the truth, it doesn't matter. Dmitri's convicted, sentenced to Siberia. It's a tragedy, right? It shows how flawed the justice system can be, how random and unfair things can be.
But Dostoevsky doesn't leave us completely in the dark. In the epilogue, there's this glimmer of hope. Alyosha, he's still on his path of faith and service, and he goes to Ilyusha's funeral. The little boy whose father Dmitri hurt. It's such a sad scene, so much grief, but there's this sense of something new beginning too.
And Alyosha, he speaks to the schoolboys, Ilyusha's friends. He tells them to love, to be compassionate, to remember Ilyusha with kindness, and keep his memory alive.
It's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Like, even with all the tragedy, all the despair, there's still hope. Hope for redemption, forgiveness, a better future.
The Brothers Karamazov, it's just this incredible book. Huge, epic. It gets into everything about what it means to be human. It's a tough read, but it's worth it. It makes you think about faith, doubt, morality. It stays with you.
Absolutely. If you're interested in any of this, want to explore these ideas more, go grab yourself a copy of the Brothers Karamazov. There's a link down in the description. And, subscribe to Books and Bytes. We do these deep dives into all sorts of amazing books.
Welcome to another deep dive on Books and Bytes. Today we're going to be looking at Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Idiot. I know Russian literature can be a little intimidating, but trust me, by the end of this, you'll see why The Idiot is considered one of the greatest novels ever written.
It really is an incredible book.
So to kick things off, let's talk about our main character, Prince Myshkin. He's just returned to Russia from Switzerland, where he was being treated for epilepsy, and almost immediately he's branded, an idiot.
Yeah, the title is definitely attention-grabbing.
But, as I'm sure you'll explain, there's a lot more to it than meets the eye.
Oh, absolutely. You see, Myshkin's idiocy isn't about a lack of intelligence. It's more about his innocence. He's a genuinely good person. He sees the good in everyone, and he trusts people maybe a little too easily. He's kind of like a holy fool, almost a Christ-like figure in a way.
Interesting. So he's thrust into this world of 19th century St. Petersburg, which, from what I've read, Dostoevsky paints as this glittering but morally corrupt society.
That's exactly right. Dostoevsky uses St. Petersburg as a microcosm of human society, with all its beauty and ugliness. There's this constant tension between the beauty of the city and the moral decay that's lurking beneath the surface. We see greed, lust for power, social climbing, all these dark impulses playing out against this backdrop of opulence.
It sounds a little like our world today, maybe.
Oh, definitely. The themes that Dostoevsky explores in The Idiot are timeless and unfortunately still very relevant.
Okay, so we have Myshkin, our well-intentioned idiot, dropped into this world of, not so good people.
Yeah.
What happens next?
Well, he gets caught up in this very intense love triangle.
Oh, love triangle. Getting good.
There are two women who are central to Myshkin's story. First, there's Nastasia Filipovna, an absolutely stunningly beautiful woman, but she carries a lot of baggage, a lot of pain from her
It
past.
sounds complicated.
She's been exploited and mistreated, so she's deeply insecure and doesn't believe she's worthy of love. Then we have Aglaya Epanchin. She comes from a wealthy, respectable family, and she represents this more traditional, idealized vision of love.
So Nastasia represents kind of a wounded love, and Aglaya represents something more pure, more innocent.
You got it. And Myshkin finds himself drawn to both of them. He feels a deep compassion for Nastasia and wants to save her from her suffering. But he's also captivated by Aglaya's beauty, her youthfulness, her potential for happiness.
I can see how this would be a difficult situation for anyone, let alone someone like Myshkin, who seems to operate on a different moral plane than everyone else.
Exactly. And to make things even more complicated, there's another man who's madly in love with Nastasia, a man named Parfen Rogozhin.
Uh-oh, another player in the game.
Rogozhin is the opposite of Myshkin. He's consumed by passion, but his love for Nastasia is possessive and ultimately destructive.
So we've got Myshkin, our innocent idiot, caught between these two women who represent very different kinds of love, and then there's Rogozhin lurking in the shadows. This sounds like a recipe for, well, a lot of drama.
Oh, there's definitely drama. And Dostoevsky really digs into the psychology of each character, showing how their pasts, their desires, their insecurities all collide and create this incredibly complex web of relationships.
Okay, I'm hooked. So tell me, where does the story go from here? How do things start to unravel for Myshkin?
Well, early on, he learns about Nastasia's past, about how she was basically taken advantage of by this older, wealthy man named Totsky.
I'm sensing a villain here.
Totsky is a pretty awful guy. Now that Nastasia is older, he's trying to basically get rid of her, trying to marry her off to this guy named Ganya Ivolgin, who just wants her money and her social connections.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
So what does Myshkin do?
Well, Myshkin, being Myshkin, can't just stand by and watch this happen. He sees the injustice of it all and feels this overwhelming need to step in and protect Nastasia.
I bet that doesn't go over well with everyone.
You're right. It causes a huge scandal. He tries to convince Ganya not to go through with the marriage, and then to everyone's shock, he proposes to Nastasia himself.
Whoa, wait a minute. A prince proposing to a woman who's been, well, let's just say she hasn't been treated well by society. That's a huge statement.
It is. In 19th century Russia, social status meant everything. Myshkin's proposal is a complete rejection of those social norms. He's saying that he sees Nastasia's worth, regardless of her past.
It's incredibly romantic in a way, but I have to say it also sounds incredibly naive.
Yeah.
I mean, this is Dostoevsky we're talking about. Things can't be that simple, can they?
You're right about that. Nastasia is torn. She's drawn to Myshkin's kindness, but she doesn't believe she deserves his love. And then Rogozhin shows up, throws a pile of money at her feet, and declares his undying love.
Wow, that complicates things.
It does. And in the moment of desperation, Nastasia rejects Myshkin's proposal and runs off with Rogozhin.
Oh, wow. Poor Myshkin. What a blow. And I have a feeling things are only going to get more complicated from here.
Oh, you have no idea. That's just the beginning. So Nastasia's taken off with Rogozhin, and Myshkin is left heartbroken and, well, I think pretty confused by the whole thing.
Yeah, I can't imagine he's used to this kind of rejection, especially given how sincere his intentions seem to be.
You're right. But here's the thing. Even though he's been rejected, Myshkin, he doesn't give up on Nastasia. He's still so convinced that he can save her, that his love can somehow heal her.
It's almost like he sees her pain more clearly than she sees it herself.
Exactly. He has this incredible empathy. And it's not just Nastasia that he wants to help. Around this time, Myshkin, he comes into a large inheritance, a lot of money. But it doesn't change him at all. He still wants to help people. He's still incredibly generous.
That's pretty rare, I'd say, especially when you consider how easily money can corrupt people.
It really is. And it just emphasizes how Dostoevsky is using Myshkin to explore this idea of pure goodness. This is someone who is completely untouched by greed or materialism.
Okay, but even with all his good intentions, I'm guessing things don't exactly go as planned for Myshkin.
Well, you're right about that. His relationship with Aglaya starts to develop, but it's complicated. She's fascinated by him, by his pure heart, but she also finds his naivety a little bit frustrating.
Yeah, I can see how those two things go hand in hand.
She's torn between her attraction to him and all those societal pressures that make a relationship with him seem impossible. I mean, her family, the Epanchins, they're very aware of their social standing, and they're not entirely convinced that Myshkin is the right man for Aglaya.
So there's this tension between what Aglaya's heart wants and what society dictates is acceptable. And all of this is happening while Rogozhin's obsession with Nastasia is intensifying.
Yes, exactly. Rogozhin becomes more and more possessive and jealous, and you really get the sense that things could turn violent at any moment. He's a ticking time bomb.
So does Myshkin ever realize the danger that he's in?
He has moments where he senses it, but his goodness, it prevents him from fully grasping the darkness that surrounds him. There's this one scene where Rogozhin actually tries to kill Myshkin.
Whoa, hold on. He tries to kill him.
Yes, but instead of being afraid or angry, Myshkin, he shows Rogozhin compassion. He actually sees Rogozhin's pain, and he forgives him.
That's incredible, and I think it speaks to what we were talking about earlier about Myshkin's almost superhuman empathy. It's like he's incapable of holding a grudge.
Exactly. He embodies this radical form of empathy and forgiveness, but it also makes him incredibly vulnerable because, well, not everyone shares his pure intentions.
So how does this love triangle play out? Does it ever get resolved?
Well, Aglaya reaches a breaking point. She's so tired of the uncertainty, tired of her own conflicting feelings, that she ends up publicly humiliating Myshkin, and she demands that he choose between her and Nastasia.
Wow. Talk about putting someone on the spot. What a terrible position for Myshkin to be in.
It really is. But he chooses Nastasia. He feels this overwhelming sense of responsibility to protect her, to save her from Rogozhin, and even from herself, from her self-destructive tendencies.
So he's finally going to get his happy ending with Nastasia.
Well, knowing Dostoevsky, you can probably guess that it's not going to be that simple. They do plan to get married, but on the day of the wedding, Nastasia gets cold feet. She's overwhelmed by anxiety and this feeling that she's unworthy of Myshkin's love, and she runs off with Rogozhin.
Oh, no. Not again. Poor Myshkin. It seems like every time he tries to do the right thing, it just backfires.
It's tragic, really. He constantly strives for good, but his efforts just seem to lead to more suffering.
So as we head into the final part of the novel, I'm getting the sense that things are about to get pretty dark.
You're absolutely right. The consequences of Myshkin's actions, or maybe inactions, are going to come to a head. So Nastasia's run off with Rogozhin again, and we all know Rogozhin's love for her is so intense and possessive, it can't possibly end well.
You're right, it doesn't.
Myshkin is so desperate to find her and make sure she's safe, he follows them, and he finds her, but she's dead. Rogozhin, in a fit of jealous rage, stabbed her.
Oh my gosh, that's just awful.
Mm-hmm.
We knew Rogozhin was capable of violence, but to actually...
I know it's really hard to hear and imagine the impact it has on Myshkin. He's already witnessed so much suffering, but what's really amazing is how he reacts.
How?
Instead of, condemning Rogozhin or turning him in, he stays with him. He spends the night in the room with Rogozhin and with Nastasia's body.
I just can't even fathom that, to experience something so horrific and then to show compassion to the person who caused it.
I know it's hard to understand, but it shows just how deeply Myshkin believes in forgiveness and redemption. He doesn't see Rogozhin as a monster, but as a human being who is capable of great love, but also capable of terrible violence.
That's such a profound message, but also a really challenging one. I mean, is Dostoevsky saying we should forgive everyone no matter what they've done?
That's a good question, and I think it's one that Dostoevsky wants us to wrestle with as readers. He's not necessarily giving us a simple answer. He's forcing us to think about the complexities of good and evil, of justice and mercy.
So what happens to Myshkin after all of this? He's been through so much. Does he ever find peace?
Sadly, no. The weight of everything he's witnessed and the constant struggle against the darkness of the world, it all becomes too much for him. His mind, which was already fragile, breaks down completely, and he retreats into this state of childlike innocence.
So he kind of returns to being the idiot, but this time it's not just a label, it's a reflection of his brokenness.
Exactly, and it's a heartbreaking end to a story that's full of hope and despair, of love and loss and the power of compassion.
Wow, The Idiot is definitely not a light read, but it's so powerful. It really makes you think about our capacity for empathy, about good and evil, and the nature of forgiveness. It's a book that stays with you.
It really does, and I think there's so much more to discover in it each time you reread it. Dostoevsky's writing is so rich and layered it.
Well, if you're intrigued by what we've talked about today and want to explore the world of The Idiot for yourself, you can find a link to the book in the show notes. And be sure to subscribe to Books and Bites for more deep dives into captivating literary worlds. Welcome back to Books and Bites. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into a really fascinating book. And this book is really intense psychologically and also philosophically. It's called Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky.
It's one of those books that really just grabs you and makes you think about the big questions of life, And what I think is really fascinating is how Dostoevsky does this all through the voice of one narrator who's unnamed, and he's often referred to as the underground man.
Yeah, and we never learn his name, do we? It just adds to the mystery of the book and also makes it more universal. This guy is just bitter and isolated. He used to work as a civil servant in St. Petersburg. He's 40 years old. He had to retire early because he was sick. And now he just spends his days thinking about how miserable he is and all the problems he sees with society.
And that's where the underground concept comes in, you know? He feels so alienated from the world around him. It's like he's living in this subterranean space, separate from everything that society considers normal. He's like overly conscious of everything, hyper aware of his feelings and his thoughts, like to the point where he can't even move.
It's almost like he's stuck in his own head, just overthinking absolutely everything, and that's why he can't take action. He's so critical of what society thinks is ideal, especially this idea of a crystal palace, where everything is perfect and totally rational.
Oh yeah, the Crystal Palace. That idea was everywhere, thanks to the philosopher Chernyshevsky, who thought it was this vision of a perfect society. You know, everything was built on logic and reason, but for the underground man, that's basically a nightmare. He doesn't think that people are just rational beings.
He thinks we're driven by something deeper, something chaotic and unpredictable. He even says that humans would rather believe that 2 + 2 = 5, just because they want to be free to choose, even if it means making bad choices.
This idea of rejecting logic and what society thinks is normal is a huge part of the underground man's philosophy. He thinks suffering and free will are really important to the human experience, even if it leads to self-destruction.
It's a pretty dark view of the world, isn't it? But Dostoevsky writes about it in such a compelling way. The first part of the book is called Underground, and it's like we're going deep into the mind of this character, right?
Yeah.
We hear him ranting about his philosophical ideas, all the reasons why he isolates himself.
And it's in this first part that Dostoevsky lays the foundation for all the existentialist themes that are throughout the novel. The underground man is wrestling with meaning, freedom, and how absurd it is to even exist. All these things are really core to existentialist philosophy.
It's like Dostoevsky wants us to face these really uncomfortable truths about ourselves through this character. You know, like he's making us ask, are we even capable of escaping the traps in our own minds? Can we find meaning in a world that just seems so meaningless?
These questions just haunt the underground man all throughout the book. And I think they're questions that anyone who's ever thought about their purpose in life, or if they even belong, will understand.
No, the first part of the book is like super philosophical, but the second part, called Apropos of the Wet Snow, shifts the focus to the things the underground man actually goes through.
Yeah, that's where we see his philosophy clash with reality. He talks about all these encounters where he ends up being humiliated, and they just make him feel even more alienated and full of self-hatred. It's like Dostoevsky is showing how the underground man's inability to connect with others just makes things worse for him, and how his self-destructive behavior really has consequences.
One of the things that stood out to me was how obsessed he gets with this officer who bumped into him on the street. He literally spends 2 years thinking about how he's going to get revenge. Like he wants to confront the officer and prove he's not worthless.
It just shows how overthinking and analyzing everything leads to you not doing anything. When he finally runs into the officer again, the guy doesn't even notice him.
The irony is almost painful, you know? He's defeated because he just can't take action, and it just makes him feel even more inadequate. And then things get even worse with that dinner party.
Oh yeah, the dinner party. He crashes this gathering with his old school friends who obviously don't want him there. He tries so hard to impress them, but it backfires completely, and he just ends up looking foolish. It just pushes him further away from any sense of belonging.
That whole scene is so awkward. It's like watching a car crash in slow motion. But it's really insightful, too, because you can see how desperately he wants to be part of something and how he just can't seem to do it.
It's like he's sabotaging himself every chance he gets. He pushes everyone away, but at the same time, he wants their approval so badly.
And then we get to the most complicated and emotionally charged part of the book, his relationship with Liza, this young prostitute.
That's where we see a whole different side of him.
Yeah.
Instead of sleeping with her, he gives her this long lecture about how terrible her life is. It's like he's trying to wake her up to reality.
It's this strange mix of him actually caring about her and him looking down on her. He wants to save her, but he's also using her to work through his own issues.
He's definitely being hypocritical. He thinks he's morally superior to Liza, but he doesn't see his own problems.
And all of that comes to a head when Liza goes to his apartment. She's hoping he'll be kind to her, that he'll understand her, but instead he totally loses it and starts yelling at her. It's like you can see all his self-hatred and insecurity pouring out.
It's so sad. And then to top it all off, he throws money at her like she's still a prostitute.
Liza just leaves without saying a word. And we're left with the underground man feeling awful about what he did. It's a really powerful ending to this part of the book, and it leaves you wondering if he can ever change. Can he escape this pattern of self-destruction?
To find out, we're going to have to look at the epilogue and see what happens with the underground man. But for now, I think it's good to just think about what Dostoevsky wants us to take away from this character. He's so flawed, but he's also very human.
Yeah, it's like he's holding up a mirror to all of us, isn't
Yeah,
it?
exactly. So we were talking about how the underground man just can't seem to catch a break, you know? He wants to connect with people, but he always ends up pushing them away and then feeling even more alone.
Like it's this never-ending cycle of him wanting something and then messing it up because of his pride or insecurity or just the fact that he hates himself so much.
Yeah, and his actions never seem to match up with what he's thinking, you know? It's like he's constantly battling with himself, trying to figure out how to exist in the world with all this awareness he has. And that brings us to the epilogue, which is really interesting because Dostoevsky kind of shifts gears again. He moves away from what's actually happening in the story and goes back into the underground man's head like we're right there with him, listening to his thoughts.
It's like we're back in the underground with him, right? Just getting this unfiltered stream of consciousness.
Yeah.
And you think he's going to have some big revelation, but then he just stops. Like he hits a wall or something.
It's a really clever thing that Dostoevsky does. He basically tells us, I've only brought you to the point where I was most aware of how humiliated I was, and then nothing. It's like he's challenging us to figure out what it all means, you know?
It's almost like he wants us to fill in the blanks ourselves and really grapple with what the underground man has gone through without giving us any easy answers. What I find really striking is that even though he's so self-aware, he still chooses to suffer.
Exactly. He actually says that he enjoys suffering, that he wants to stay in his little self-made underground forever. It's a really important part of understanding him because it shows this deep-seated need to punish himself, which is part of why he rejects what society expects and why he doesn't want to be happy.
So as we're getting to the end of our deep dive here, I think it's good to take a step back and look at the big picture. What are the most important things we can take away from Notes from Underground? It's such a dense book with so many ideas, it's easy to get lost in the underground man's head.
Well, absolutely. But I think one of the biggest takeaways is how Dostoevsky explores this idea of radical free will. The underground man really hates the idea that people are only driven by logic or what's best for them. He thinks what makes us human is our ability to choose, even if those choices are irrational or end up hurting us.
And that ties into his feeling so alienated and isolated, right? He purposely separates himself from everyone else because he's afraid of being judged and he wants to hold on to his individuality, even if it means being lonely and unhappy. I think a lot of us can relate to that in some way.
For sure. I think most of us have felt that pull between wanting to fit in and being afraid of losing ourselves in the process. The underground man takes it to the extreme, but his struggles are relatable because they're about something that's fundamental to being human.
His inability to actually do anything is another thing that really stands out. He's so busy overthinking and analyzing every situation that he gets paralyzed and can't really live his life. He wants revenge on the people he thinks have wronged him, but he never does anything about it. He's just stuck in this cycle of resentment and inaction.
And it's not just a personal flaw, you know? It's like Dostoevsky is criticizing intellectualism in general and saying that it's dangerous to prioritize thinking over doing and experiencing. He seems to be saying that real meaning and fulfillment come from engaging with the world and accepting the messiness of human relationships, not from just sitting around thinking about stuff.
And that brings us to this idea of intellectuals being hypocrites, which is something Dostoevsky brings up over and over in the book. The underground man thinks he's so smart and sophisticated, but his actions show that he's actually pretty immature and selfish. He lectures Liza about her morals, but he doesn't even see his own flaws and contradictions.
He's like a caricature of a certain type of intellectual who loves to criticize society but can't offer any real solutions. He's stuck in this negativity and self-pity, which just keeps him from growing and finding happiness. It's like a warning about what can happen if you become too arrogant and think you're better than everyone else. It's so important to be humble and look at yourself honestly.
His relationship with Liza is really interesting because she's like a ray of hope for him. You know?
Yeah.
She's a chance for him to have a real connection with someone and maybe even redeem himself. But he messes it up because he can't get over his own insecurities and accept the love she's offering.
The scene where he throws money at her is like a symbol of how he just can't truly connect with another person. He turns their interaction into this cold transaction, which just reinforces how isolated he is and all the power dynamics he claims to hate. It's a really tragic moment that shows all the main themes of the book: self-sabotage, alienation, and this desperate search for meaning in a world that seems meaningless.
So we're nearing the end of this deep dive, and I think we're left with this big question. What is Dostoevsky trying to tell us through this character who's so messed up but also so human?
It's a question that people have been asking for over 150 years. Is the underground man a warning about what happens when individualism goes too far? Or is he a tragic hero fighting against the absurdity of existence?
I think it's up to each reader to decide, you know. Dostoevsky doesn't give us easy answers. And, one thing that really stuck with me from Notes from Underground is when the Underground man says that being too conscious is like a sickness, you know, like a real full-blown disease. It's such a weird thing to say, but it really shows what he's going through.
Yeah, it's like a contradiction, isn't it? He thinks that because he's so aware of everything, he's somehow better than everyone else, like he's above the masses. But at the same time, that's why he's so unhappy. It keeps him from actually living his life, from connecting with people, from finding any kind of peace.
It's like he's trapped in his own thoughts, always analyzing every little thing, and it just makes him miserable. He can't even exist in the moment because he's so busy thinking, and it's what leads to him being alone and feeling hopeless.
Dostoevsky seems to be saying that this kind of thinking, this obsession with being smart and rational, can actually trap you. The underground man is so focused on what's wrong with the world and how people don't make sense that he misses all the good stuff, the love and kindness and connection that actually make life worth living.
It makes you wonder if Dostoevsky's trying to warn us about being too intellectual. Like today, we're always getting bombarded with information and we're supposed to analyze and criticize everything. Could that lead to us all becoming like the underground man, so detached from our emotions and each other that we forget what it means to be human?
That's a really interesting question, and I bet Dostoevsky would have loved to talk about it. This book is so timeless because it deals with these struggles that are just part of being human, The struggle between thinking and feeling, between being an individual and belonging to something bigger, between wanting freedom and needing connection.
So if being too conscious is really a disease, like the underground man says, what can we do about it? Dostoevsky doesn't exactly tell us. But it seems like he's pointing us toward the things that the underground man rejects: faith, love, compassion, accepting ourselves and other people for who they are.
It's like he's saying that real meaning and happiness come from embracing the messiness of life, not from locking ourselves away in our minds. It's about finding the beauty in everyday things, connecting with people on a real level, and being grateful for just being alive.
This is a really powerful message, and it feels so relevant today. The world feels so divided and disconnected sometimes. But Dostoevsky reminds us that connecting with each other is important and that there's meaning to be found outside of our own heads.
He's challenging us to step outside of our comfort zones, to be vulnerable, and to try to understand people who are different from us. He's saying that real strength comes from being open to new experiences and connecting with people on a heart level and finding meaning even when things are hard.
That's so true. Well, if our deep dive into Notes from Underground has you intrigued, we encourage you to check out the book. We've got a link in the episode description for you.
And don't forget to subscribe to Books and Bytes for more deep dives into the world of literature. We'll be back soon with another fascinating exploration.
See you next time. Welcome back to Books and Bytes. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into Fyodor Dostoevsky's Demons. It was published in 1872, but this book really packs a punch even all these years later.
It's really fascinating how Dostoevsky takes you to this seemingly quiet Russian town and uses it to show you a society that's right on the edge. He just weaves these huge ideas like nihilism and revolution and the search for meaning into the lives of these really unforgettable characters.
And yeah, they're certainly not boring. Dostoevsky definitely isn't afraid to show us the darker parts of human nature. And he even draws inspiration from a real event: this murder of a student by a revolutionary group.
Right, and that real-life connection just adds this chilling layer to everything. It really makes you think about how ideology, any ideology, can twist even the best intentions into something really monstrous. And we see this play out so clearly with the character of Nikolai Stavrogin. He's a nobleman, recently back from exile, and there's just this cloud of mystery hanging over him.
Yeah, he's definitely not your typical hero. Right from the beginning, he does some pretty shocking things, like biting off a man's ear during a duel. It makes you wonder, what's driving him?
Well, Dostoevsky uses these shocking acts to give us a glimpse into Stavrogin's nihilism, this complete disregard for life, everyone's, even his own. It's a huge warning sign that something's just deeply wrong with him.
And then there's Pyotr Verkovensky, who's this cunning revolutionary who just seems to thrive on stirring up trouble.
Yeah, Pyotr's not just some idealistic rebel, though, right? He's really hungry for power, he's so manipulative, and he's totally willing to exploit anyone to get what he wants. Makes you wonder about how ambition, even when it seems like it's disguised as something good, can just be so dangerous.
Totally. And what's really interesting is how Dostoevsky contrasts Pyotr with his father, Stepan, who represents this older generation of liberals.
Yeah, they wanted progress, but they might have unintentionally paved the way for the kind of radicalism that Pyotr embodies. Stepan's well-meaning, but he's totally blind to the dangerous forces he's helped to unleash.
Yeah, it's like a cautionary tale about those unintended consequences.
Definitely.
And then Fyodor doesn't work alone either. He assembles this whole group of revolutionaries, each with their own, unique brand of intensity. Like there's Kirilov, who is just obsessed with suicide as the ultimate expression of free will.
Yeah, it's a really dark and unsettling concept. Kirilov is just this really tragic figure. He's so desperate to find meaning in a world that he sees as godless, and sadly his only solution is this self-destruction. Dostoevsky explores the bleak side of existentialism through him, right? We see how the search for meaning, when it goes too far, can just lead to despair.
For sure. And then there's Shakov, who's actually trying to break free from this radical ideology. He's turning back toward more traditional Russian values.
Yeah, like he's just searching for solid ground in this world that feels like it's totally falling apart. Shatov's story is interesting because he's this glimmer of hope. He's someone who sees just how dangerous Fyodor's path is. But it's ironic because his turn towards Russian nationalism actually makes him a target for Fyodor's manipulation. It shows how even those who are seeking stability can get caught up in this extremism.
Right. As the story keeps unfolding, we start to uncover these disturbing rumors about Stavrogin's past. Like there's his marriage to Maria Lebyatkina, who's a disabled woman, and then this just horrifying revelation about his assault on a young girl, which ultimately leads to her suicide.
It's like Dostoevsky is peeling back these layers of this dark and troubled past. This is where we see just how depraved Stavrogin really is. He's completely haunted by his guilt, but it's like it keeps pushing him further and further into this darkness, makes you question the nature of evil, Is it something we're born with, or is it something that our experiences shape?
It's true. Dostoevsky definitely isn't afraid to ask those tough questions. And then as the story progresses, Fyodor's revolution starts gaining all this momentum. Things just spiral so out of control. Then Shatov is brutally murdered right as he's finding this new purpose as a father.
Yeah, it's so heartbreaking. It's such a loss of potential, and it just perfectly symbolizes the kind of destruction that radical ideology can bring. That murder is like this turning point in the story. It just totally exposes Fyodor's true nature.
For sure.
He's willing to eliminate anyone who even stands in his way, even people he used to be close to.
Wow.
It just shows how fanaticism can lead to such cruelty.
Yeah, definitely. And then there's Kirilov's suicide, which is, it's chilling, but it's also thought-provoking at the same time. He follows through on his twisted logic, but it's clear it's just pure despair driving him, not this genuine freedom he talks about.
Exactly. He's completely trapped. And Dostoevsky contrasts this with Stavrogin's suicide later, and that contrast just shows the different shades of despair that can cause someone to take their own life.
Right. And then Fyodor, this is just pure manipulation. He orchestrates this elaborate town festival, right? Which is supposed to be this distraction, but it just descends into total chaos.
Oh, yeah.
There are fires, riots, murders. It's a complete societal meltdown.
It's like watching a carefully constructed world just completely crumble. That the festival is such a powerful symbol, don't you think?
Yeah.
It just shows the breakdown of order and morality. Like it's this microcosm of what Fyodor's revolution really is. Not progress, just pure destruction. And then throughout all of this, Stavrogin is so detached, almost like he's a ghost, just watching all the carnage he helped to create.
Yeah, he's such an enigma, isn't he? Like he inspires all these intense emotions in other people, but he can't seem to feel anything himself. It makes you wonder if he's a product of this nihilistic world or if he's like the catalyst for its decay.
Yeah, it's a question that really lingers as we move into the next part of our deep dive. We've seen the rise of these demons and the chaos that they've unleashed, but there's still so much more to uncover.
There is. We still need to explore the tragic downfall of those who got caught in the crossfire and really unpack the full weight of Dostoevsky's message. So we'll be back in part 2 to continue our exploration of demons. Until then, keep those pages turning.
Welcome back to Books and Bites. We're still deep in the world of Dostoevsky's demons, and the last time we left off, things were really heating up, literally. The town was going up in flames, and things are about to get even more tragic for some of these characters.
Yeah, it's like watching this slow-motion train wreck. And one of the most heartbreaking stories has to be Liza Tishina's. She's this incredibly intelligent and passionate woman who just falls for Stavrogin. It's almost hard to watch her get caught in his web.
Liza really represents this naive idealism that Dostoevsky explores a lot in his books. She sees the good in Stavrogin, but she's completely blind to how destructive he is. It makes you think about how much our own desires and perceptions can blind us to reality.
Yeah, definitely. And her story takes this really brutal turn. She's desperately trying to escape Stavrogin's toxic influence, but then she gets caught in the middle of the riot and is brutally murdered.
It's awful. It's a reminder that innocence is often the first thing to be destroyed in a world that's consumed by chaos. Her death is symbolic, don't you think?
Yeah.
It's like the death of hope itself. And then there's Stavrogin, who's been such a mystery this whole time. He finally seems to break down under the weight of all this darkness.
It's a fascinating arc. He completely rejects Pyotr revolution, almost like he suddenly realizes what a monster he helped to create. But he's so damaged that he just can't find a way back from the abyss he's in.
Right.
He chooses to isolate himself. He withdraws from everyone and everything. And then ultimately he takes his own life.
It's a bleak ending for such a complex character. It really leaves you with this feeling of unease, like there are all these unanswered questions. And his suicide is especially disturbing when you think about Kirillov's earlier in the book. Kirillov thought suicide was the ultimate freedom, like he was defying God and fate. But Stavrogin's just feels different.
Yeah, totally.
There's no freedom in it at all.
None.
Stavrogin's suicide is born out of pure despair. It's like he's completely surrendering to this emptiness that he feels inside. It's the culmination of a life that's just steeped in nihilism.
Dostoevsky really forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths about what it means to be human. He doesn't make things easy for us, does he? He doesn't give us any easy answers.
Not at all.
It's like he's holding up this mirror to society, making us look at the darkness that's inside all of us and in the world that we're creating.
It's heavy, but it's so important, and it's even more powerful because even though the revolution fails and it seems like order is restored in the town, there's still this feeling that something's broken that can't be fixed.
Yeah, you're right. It's like the town and the people in it have been changed forever by what happened. These characters, these demons, have exposed just how fragile society really is. And they've shown the dark potential that's lurking beneath the surface of even the most civilized places.
It makes you wonder, are these demons something outside of us, or are they just part of who we are? Is it even possible to get rid of them completely, or are we always going to be fighting them?
These are questions that just stay with you long after you finish the book. Demons isn't just a story. It's an experience. It makes you think critically about the world and your place in it. It makes you question everything good and evil, the power of ideas, and the search for meaning in a world that often feels meaningless.
And it really makes you think, are we all vulnerable to these demons? Could we find ourselves caught up in their web? Are we strong enough to resist them as individuals and as a society?
Yeah, those are some pretty big questions. And those are some of the questions that we're going to keep exploring as we go into the final part of our deep dive into demons. We'll look closer at the ending and what it all means and why it still matters to us today. Stay tuned. We're not done yet. Welcome back to Books and Bytes. We're wrapping up our deep dive into Dostoevsky's demons. And man, what a journey this book has taken us on. From this quiet little town to just this eruption of total chaos and violence. It's been a wild ride through some really dark parts of human nature.
It's definitely not a light read, but it really sticks with you. The way Dostoevsky explores these huge themes, like the danger of these radical ideologies, feels so relevant even today.
Totally. So let's talk about the ending. We see the revolution just completely fall apart and Pyotr Verkovensky running away like a coward, leaving this trail of destruction in his wake. It's almost like the whole thing was doomed right from the beginning.
Yeah, there's definitely this sense of inevitability to it all. Like Dostoevsky's saying that these radical ideologies, with all their promises of utopia, just carry the seeds of their own destruction. They just consume everything, even their most devoted followers.
And the consequences reach so far beyond the revolutionaries themselves. We see Stepan Verkovensky, Pyotr's father, die a broken man. He realizes way too late that his own ideals may have actually led to his son's extremism.
It's heartbreaking, like he represents this whole generation that maybe put too much faith in reason and progress without really understanding how those ideas could be twisted and corrupted.
Yeah, it's definitely a cautionary tale. Dostoevsky seems to be telling us to be more critical, to question everything, and to be really careful about anyone who promises easy solutions to really complex problems. It's a message that's so relevant today, don't you think?
Absolutely. I mean, we're surrounded by these different ideologies and promises of easy answers. But Dostoevsky reminds us that The search for truth and meaning requires us to really think things through and to be willing to wrestle with the hard stuff, not just the easy answers, and to really try to understand human nature.
Right. And even though things eventually calm down and order seems to be restored in the town, there's this lingering sense of loss and disillusionment. It's like the town and the people who live there have been changed forever by what they went through.
It shows how long trauma can last for individuals and entire communities. The scars stay even after things seem okay on the surface.
Right. And that feeling, that unease, like things will never be the same, is part of what makes Demons such a haunting and thought-provoking book.
It's not just a historical novel or a political thriller. It's like this deep reflection on what it means to be human, this struggle between good and evil, faith and doubt, hope and despair. It makes us look at ourselves, face our own demons, and try to find meaning in a world that can feel so chaotic.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Demons, what do you think is the most important thing for our listeners to take away? What's the one idea that you hope sticks with them?
I think Dostoevsky's message is one of warning, but also hope. He's warning us about the dangers of just giving up on everything, the appeal of these extreme beliefs, and the need for all of us to take responsibility for our ideas. But he also reminds us that faith, love, and compassion are powerful. Even in the darkest times, those things can guide us towards something better.
I love that. If you're ready to grapple with these huge themes yourself, we really encourage you to pick up a copy of Demons using the link in the description. You won't regret it.
And if you like this deep dive into Dostoevsky's work, be sure to subscribe to Books and Bites for more discussions about amazing and thought-provoking books. Until next time, happy reading.